Okay, welcome everyone to the Technology and Humanity Forum by Ashoka and Google.org. I'm sure all of you have attended the previous sessions, the panels and the keynotes, which have been quite enriching with diverse perspectives. And here we deep dive, continue to have the conversation on technology and humanity and the intersection of that with a very inspiring group of panelists. Uh, all of them representing organizations who are influencers and thought leaders in the education space in India. So it is my honor and delight to have this panel with me today in conversation. So we have Rajshekhar Kaliki from the Kaivalya Education Foundation. We have Samina Bano from Right Walk Foundation. We have Nikita Bengani from Quest Alliance and Atul Bhargava from Central Square Foundation. Welcome all of you. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. Uh, we're going to start with a set of initial questions, and then if there are any questions from the participants, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll take them in as the panel discussion moves forward. Uh, I'm going to invite each of the panelists to also give an introduction to themselves and the organizations they represent as they go into the first question. The point of discussion in this panel today is driving district and national transformation of learning ecosystems that includes the most vulnerable young populations. So these are organizations that have worked on entire learning ecosystem transformations at the district and national level, including working with some of the most vulnerable populations. And we're hoping that we can get a glimpse into how they make that happen. So I'm going to kick it off with the first question, and Raj, I'm going to invite you to take on the first response. From your own work at Kaivalya Education Foundation, and you've worked very closely with governments in multiple states, what does large-scale transformation look like in education systems? Maybe if you could help us get a context of that, an example to demonstrate it, and what are maybe one or two key ingredients that enable large-scale transformations, so we can get a glimpse into how we can enable that in other ecosystems too. So Raj, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Vishal. So quickly, my name is Rajshekhar Kaliki. I'm from Kaivalya Education Foundation, KEF in short. And KEF is an organization that's with the primary purpose of improving the life chances of children going to the 1 million plus public schools in India. That's our overall aspiration. And we've been working in this field since 2008. At the moment, we're present across 15 states in India, implementing programs at multiple levels, some programs directly at school level, where we do a lot of classroom level and school level innovation, and several programs at district level to pick up district as a unit of transformation and run through all of our change interventions at large scale in districts, and multiple programs at state and national level as well. And state is where, as you know, education is the topic of state primarily, and that is where all the major decisions get done, from curriculum to teacher recruitment to assessments, everything. So we work at all these three level. So these programs are backed by a large-scale, multi-dimensional product development team that's in-house, and multiple technical partnerships, as well as a couple of very, very well-known fellowship programs. There was a reference Sumit was making earlier about youth fellowship. So we run a program called Gandhi Fellowship for Youth and Karuna Fellowship for Women. So these are our back-end support for these programs. So that's a quick introduction about organization. And to your question, Vishal, related to how do we see large-scale transformation in education? So if you really think about it, ultimately the child going to a public school, and in general any school, but I'll focus more on public school, a lot of us think that the experience that the child is getting is all dependent on the teacher. A lot more is attributed to the teacher. And sometimes we tend to forget that there is an institution behind the teacher. Of course, teacher has a role to play, but there is a massive institution, multiple layers of organization behind the teacher. And that plays a very important role in both the skill, the capabilities of the teacher, as well as the will and the motivation of the teacher. And our emphasis about driving large scale improvement is working on the institution behind the teacher, supporting the teacher. So we try to bring in pretty much world-class best practices in strengthening public education institutions, thereby eventually making the teacher their experiences better, which will in turn translate down to children having better experience in the classroom, and experience will drive the learning outcome. And very quickly, to your second part of your question, what exactly are the pillars of this kind of large-scale transformation? I will just highlight a couple of areas we work on. One, to begin with, leadership is extremely crucial. As you know, people grow in the education department and in general in government through years of experience. And when you really end up in a district level cadre, I think there are about 5,000 district level leaders in education departments across India. What kind of real back and training and the kind that is available to the world have they really gone through? So we have a massive investment in leadership development of district leaders, especially focused on their own personal leadership, people leadership, social leadership, organizational leadership, multiple dimensions of leadership capabilities that leaders could work on. And second, the entire design of institutions. We talked about institutions earlier. If I pick a simple example, sometimes people don't even know exactly what their job description says. If you go to a CRC and you notice that the CRC is primarily spending all his or her time in administrative tasks, and just letting the CRC realize that there is a massive academic responsibility on the CRC to work with the teacher and develop on them. Even that level of awareness doesn't exist. So OD practices. Similarly, deployment of process and technology, especially with the intent of two areas. One is the area where there are a lot of inefficiencies. Time goes in administrative tasks, and thereby the teachers and the officials are not able to spend time in academic tasks. And second area is, do you have enough data to make decisions, thereby improve governance broadly. And last but not the least, the teacher professional development support itself. We put a lot of pressure on the teachers, saying when things don't go well, we always attribute to let's work on teachers. But is there really right one-to-one coaching support and professional development support for the teacher? So these are like 3, 4 examples of levers that we use in our large scale transformation, and maybe rest I can pick up as this conversation continues.
Thank you, Raj. I think that was very well laid out. And what I picked up is primarily your work is around strengthening public educations that deliver public institutions that deliver education. And within that, you look a whole span of things from leadership development to process improvements, deployment of technology, uh, in the design of institutions itself, and roles and responsibilities, and teacher professional development and support. So I think it's a very well laid out process, which is really looking at the middle management, what one might call, of education ecosystems in India. So thank you so much for that. So let's move across to Samina. And Samina, your work has largely been in ensuring that policies that the government has made around access and quality of education to the most vulnerable, those policies actually work and reach the most vulnerable at right for formulation. So if you had to explore this question of what does a large scale transformation look like for you in your work, in your context, and what are some of the pillars or key ingredients that make that happen? It'll be great to explore that.
Sure. Thank you, Vishal. Thank you very much. I'll begin with a quick introduction about me and Right Work Foundation. So I'm Samina, and I'm leading Right Work Foundation in Uttar Pradesh. We are addressing structural inequality through public policy intervention. And now these structural inequalities, they hit the vulnerable section the most. I'll come to the public policy intervention. What do I really mean by that? And how does this translate into large scale transformation? Let me first come to Uttar Pradesh, like why this geography? Uttar Pradesh is not just a state in India, it's like a country. It's larger than the whole of Brazil in terms of population. And it's larger than 17 Indian states, again, if you combine the population of those states. And some of his human development indices is worse than sub-Saharan Africa. So working in a state like Uttar Pradesh and working in large-scale transformation, I mean, it's in itself a challenge of different kind altogether. So the strategies that we had to use in UP had been slightly different, which I'll come to the ingredients part later. But what do I really mean by public policy intervention? So what we noticed is the market forces. The market serves only the India that is able to pay, and the India that is not able to pay, which is your vulnerable section of the society, is mostly left out. And to serve that vulnerable section of the society, government has their welfare schemes. And our study has found that India has been spending somewhere around $400 billion every year on welfare schemes to meet SDGs. Out of this $400 billion, 40% of welfare schemes fail to meet their intended outcome. So we are talking about somewhere around $160 billion literally going waste and not realizing their true potential. And the total size of the private philanthropy, adding everything, is somewhere around $10 billion, which is not even 2.5% of what country is spending on welfare schemes. So if we are, how to really spend this philanthropy money? If you're spending to build parallel system, I mean, the size that you can really serve or the population you can really serve is very small. But if you use this money to unlock these welfare schemes or improve their efficiency or unlock the money which is not getting spent at all, the overall impact can be really huge. So 1% improvement in efficiency of any public policy implementation or unlocking a new policy in itself will unlock $4 billion of public money. So that was something that triggered us into a large scale transformation. And that's how we picked up right to education, one of the policies that we are currently working in. We pick up a policy which drives inclusion and equality, and we work end to end from advocacy to system design, implementation, monitoring, like everything. We work with the system, we work with the government, we leverage existing institutions, we build robust governance models, and we try to build an entire system which can be on a autopilot mode after a few years of intervention. So year on year you are able to create impact on its own through the strengthened institutions rather than building a parallel system. So right to education policy, which is about private education, private schools, driving inclusion in the classrooms of private schools by mandating all these schools to reserve 25% seats for children from vulnerable communities. This particular policy was not getting implemented in Uttar Pradesh. We had only 54 admissions in 2014, but after our intervention, everything that I just said, after doing that, in 6 years, we have impacted 230,000 children. And I think it would not have been possible if we had only built a parallel system, if we had only worked with the vulnerable children, if we had not worked with the government and the system influencers at all. So for me, the ingredients basically is finding your influencers, your supporters within the government, the positive influencers, using subtle top-down model, because it's very important that you have the go-ahead of the people who are sitting at the top leadership. They are supporting you. At the same time, you're connected to the ground. You are taking everybody together. So that strategic top-down model is quite important for us. And third, which thing that has really worked for us is engaging other stakeholders like community, media, and judiciary. So these other stakeholders help hold system accountable. So whatever you build, if it is everything is transparent and in the public domain, and media, people, community can hold government accountable, then the sustainability of these large scale transformations is built. So that's how it looks like for us. Yeah, I'll stop here. Maybe give chances to other.
Thank you, Samina. It's fascinating listening to both you and Raj, that you've both taken on public institutions, but your entry points have been very different. And I think what I'm picking up is that you need to identify a critical entry point and make that the lever of transformation. And I think what I really liked in what you said, Samina, is that one was about unlocking public capital, but that's already sitting there, which is either being underutilized or wasted, and making sure that's used for its right outcomes and holding the government accountable for these outcomes. And I think that was a critical part. So thank you for sharing that. Nikita, I'll come to you now. And I think we'll change track here because I think a big part of Questa's work has been with unlocking agency and self-learning capacities in young people, again, largely from vulnerable communities. So how have you gone about doing that, and what have been your levers for large-scale transformation?
Sure. Thanks, Vishal. I think if in India you have to work on systems change, you have to work with the public good, and I guess that's where all of us and all of the organizations work. But like you said, I guess the point of entry could be very different. So I think if we, if I was to talk a little bit about what we do at Quest, I think we're really driven by a larger vision of how do we enable young people to really become self learners and have the agency to drive their own socioeconomic growth. So that's sort of a larger systems change agenda by itself, that how hence our educational systems and learning spaces are designed such that they're allowing young people to build that agency, how teachers are looking at their roles, how the learning environments are being created, which allows for some of this agency building to happen. And I think listening to some of the other panels as well previously, and listening to some of the young people who were there as well, I think especially when we are looking to prepare young people for the future that is so volatile, it's changing so quickly. I think the ability to thrive in these environments which are changing, I think that's the lever Quest Alliance sort of leads with, that if we were to be able to empower our young people with those skills where they're able to deal with ambiguity, they constantly have this ability to have a learning mindset, they're able to pivot to things quickly. I think that would hopefully help these young people to navigate through these unknown futures and the times. So I think building on this further, some of the key levers of change that we as Quest Alliance work towards, as system change levers are, things on how do we really foster collaboration with all the different stakeholders, because for a system to change, all the stakeholders need to align to something common, and being able to like really bring in their energies together for a collective action, be aligned to a common vision, being aligned to a common how of how do you do things. So I think one of the biggest levers of change for us has been fostering collaboration. The others have been very similar to what Raj was talking about as well, in terms of building capacities of different stakeholders and even the system at large. And the third one is really using technology as an enabler to allow for the systems change to happen. So I'll just deep down a little bit more into the lens of fostering collaboration and how at Quest we've been doing that. And I think one of the things that we've learned, through our work is really that if you want to transform systems, it's really about transforming the relationships between people that make up the system, and how the power dynamics between those different stakeholders work. And I think just being able to manage a lot of that, to be able to bring people together and have relationships where they align to common things, manage the power dynamics, because if you're talking about stakeholders such as government systems and government right from district to state to national level, sort of collaborations, to then working with private players, the donor communities, the influencers, to then working with all of the different not-for-profits who are aligned to this whole idea of bringing about changes in the learning communities, to like communities themselves, which could be parents, teachers, young people. So I think being able to bring all of these stakeholders onto a common page, and also to be able to manage these relationships, manage the power dynamics, has really been, I think, a great learning. And I think one of the things that we've done also, and I'll quickly just talk about it in 1 minute, is that, we've also been able to create a consortium, for example, which is what we call the Future Right Skills Network, which is sort of, a consortium of a lot of our donors coming together and pooling in resources, aligning to common vision, bringing their energies together to a common collective impact statement that we all want to work with, and then taking this together to government systems, as a call to action. So I think some of these kinds of aspects, I think, has really worked well for us, and I feel are key ingredients when you're looking at large scale transformations.
Thank you, Nikita. That was quite rich. And I think my key takeaway was around aligning towards a common vision, building and aligning towards a common vision, and how you bring in players who influence the experience of a child and the learning ecosystem of a child, whether it be parents, educationists, policymakers, to donor communities, to employers. And I think that's where I think West's key lever has been for transformation. So bringing these diverse players to align into a common vision. So thank you for sharing that. Atul, I know you've been waiting for some time, but I know you have some rich insights to share. Um, so Atul, Central Square Foundation has truly been a driver of changing narratives around education in the country in the last decade. A huge part of your work has been around influencing public policy and public narratives around what's not working in education and what needs to change. But today I want you to focus a bit on your key initiative, which has integrated technology into learning and is taking that to millions of children out there. So Atul, just give a quick introduction of yourself and talk us into this new initiative and how that's built to transform education ecosystems.
Thanks, Vishal. Thanks for introducing. So basically, I am at Central Square Foundation leading this initiative called Tic Tac Learn, which essentially is a large repository of content, and it's reaching millions of students. But just to throw a light on how we started around 2 years ago, so there was a research conducted by Google.org, YouTube, and Central Square Foundation, which is now very intuitive that there is lack of content, lack of digital content for school students, both English, Hindi, and vernacular languages. In English, something exists, but that has a price tag, which around 90% of the students in India cannot afford. As mentioned, I think previously by Samina, that a lot of people are left out. For vernacular languages, there is almost nothing. So then we started with creating videos for maths and science for all grades. Today, what we have around 10,000 videos across maths, science, all grades, cutting across 5 languages. So English, Hindi, Marathi, Telugu, and Odia. Right. So that's where we are, and now we are in the process of building assessments also, which would be linked to the videos to give the students a full spectrum of the learning product. And obviously, it has come in handy. We were there at the right time, and the content has been of help to the various state governments and students during the lockdown when the schools were not open. So that's a brief about Tic Tac Learn. Uh, Coming to your earlier question of how we've come to this thing that using this repository to do large scale transformation, I think we've been successful in doing three things. One is building the right product. What I mean by right product, it's not just being pedagogically sound, which it is, but even apart from that, it has to be engaging. For example, right? It has, so all our videos are animated. For example, especially junior grades. Second, it has to be engaging. So it's animated, so it's obviously engaging. Pedagogically sound it is. So each video, for example, would have three components, right? So one would be the hook concept, one would be the example, and last would be the hard spot, the places where the student makes the maximum mistakes. So it's mostly covering everything. So that's the definition that we had, right product. Second was, once the product is there, if the process of delivery is not correct, then the reach is not there. So what we consciously did, we did not put all the content on our platform, created a separate entity, and then tried to pitch it. We used the existing platforms. What were they? They were as basic as YouTube, Ministry of HRD, which is now MOE platform Diksha, uh, even Facebook for that matter, Colibri, and a lot of other platforms, NGO partners. We've partnered with around 15, 20 NGOs like Avanti, Bharti Foundation, and even allowed the content to go out in an offline format. So although we can't count views and everything, but we know that it's kind of reaching the last mile, or it has the potential to reach the last mile. So that's something which we consciously did. Lastly, I'll say the government ownership. The government is must, right? As said by a couple of people before. Without that, it might have been pretty difficult. So we approached a couple of governments, and for example, 7 governments have included Tic Tac Learn as a part of their state programs, as a part of their COVID response. So basically how it flows, from SCRT, a content piece will go right down to the district, to the block, to the headmaster, parents, and then the student on a daily basis. So that's something which has allowed us to reach around 4 crore views on YouTube till date in the last 6-7 months. Diksha we've leveraged. Around 18 states are using TikTok learn content via Diksha. Even television, for that example, right? So there are 6 states which are using TikTok learn content, showing it for half an hour to 1.5 hour every day on Doordarshan regional channel or via EduSat. So government has been the key, without which my sense is, it would have been difficult to do justice to the videos that we created. Yeah.
Thank you, Atul. I think what I'm taking away is creating something that's relevant to the most vulnerable populations, creating something as a public good, and the key lever being creating government ownership for the dissemination, delivery, and the final impact on the ground. So maybe I'll come back to you, Atul. It's amazing the kind of reach you have had with this platform and this content. What is the impact you've had, and how do you know this is creating impact and reaching the last mile, really the most vulnerable sections?
That's a great question, right? So two things here. One, when we started creating these videos, we did a kind of pilot and testing on students where we found that it is creating some impact. Uh, but when we talk of taking it to the last mile, creating a large scale impact, that's where I would like to state what Nikita also mentioned, that we are looking for collaborations, right? So we have created this, but we have no programs around it. Now, what is required to create impact, right? So even as I said, right, that governments are sending this content, but now how do we know that the students are consuming it in the right amount? So that's something which is required. Programs have to be designed around it, and sustainable usage has to be ensured. So that's where the partnerships come in handy, right? For example, Convegenius, for example, Rocket Learning. These places are now building programs around it, using WhatsApp, using other platforms, and that would be something which is required. And again, there are partnerships with even offline, very remote people, very remote schools in Jammu and Kashmir have approached that they need this content in an offline format. So how can they have it? So that's where we have contributed to trying to take it to the last mile as well.
Thank you, Atul. Raj, let me come to you. You mentioned that a key lever has been technology. So what has been your experience of taking technology within government systems and education systems?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that, Vishal. Quick. So I think one important thing to know is that in general, technology adoption in education, especially in public education, has been slow in India. We all know that. And during the pandemic, the current situation, it's becoming more and more evident. The digital divide between children going to public schools versus the rest of the children is becoming more and more evident. And NEP 2020 also calls out for multiple ways of using technology. Our way of looking at technology in education is not, is of course it includes children access to digital content, the usage of technology in the classroom, definitely, but it's also way beyond that. How do you do teacher professional development? What role can technology play there, like Diksha platforms? And how do you use technology for even administrative purposes, data-based decision making, improving the efficiency of the systems in the government, etc. So we have done multiple projects across various governments in each of these areas, trying to streamline some of their processes and build technology solutions on top of it. In general, the reception has been pretty good, especially from senior management level. Adoption, we need to work very carefully at all level, especially the capacity building and making sure there is a digital reach, whether it is the devices or network connectivity, and how do you make the technology you are developing more offline friendly. So all these precautions need to be taken care so that adoption also takes off. But I'll keep it brief and stop there because we're also short of time.
Thank you, Raj. Samina and Nikita, I'm going to give you the last question. We've all seen in our work in large-scale systems transformation that someone is always left out. And when we move into ecosystemic transformation, what could sometimes be the negative implications of that, and who could potentially be left out? So, what should we be mindful of So Nikita, maybe first you for a minute, and then Samina close it off with the last minute.
Yeah, I'll just keep it really brief. So I think three things, I was thinking about as you were asking this question, Vishal. I think one, when we are designing these systems for, the end user, let's say if I could use that term, and in our case, especially the work of Quest, we're talking about learners. But when we design these systems, where is the voice of that learner in the design? I think that's one thing I feel, that voice gets left behind, and it oftentimes becomes a very top-down approach to systems design. The other is, I feel like, when you're looking at doing things at a large scale, oftentimes it's so big and so macro that, and India being such a diverse country, there are a lot of, customization and personalization and contextualization that's required at the last mile. And oftentimes in large scale systems transformation, that lens also gets lost. And I think the third thing really is that, it's easy to start the process of systems transformation, but I think the ability to sustain it over a period of time. And oftentimes the change agents that are driving this, when they exit out of it, it oftentimes falls back to the original spaces. So how do you get the community to hold the systems accountable, or, really play that role of a watchdog to say that, okay, this is what we need it to be. And, who's really making it happen at the end of the day is critical. So I think these are just three things I quickly wanted to touch upon. Over to you.
Thank you, Nikita. Yeah, Samina.
Yeah, so I'll just keep it very brief. So to me, the most vulnerable of the vulnerable group, the smaller groups like the disabled, the transgenders, I have experienced that they are somehow left out, because they don't bring numbers, and there is so much of pressure, so much of obsession with the number when we are doing large scale transformation, and we are talking in huge numbers and percentage coverage, and we are happy with a 90% coverage, but we do not realize that in that 90% coverage and success rate, the 10% which is left out, it is completely meaningless, because for that 10%, they are missing out 100% of the opportunities. It's literally zero for them. So till we reach the last person and everyone is included, we are not successful. So if be disabled, transgender, widows, old people, everyone has to be included, and I really struggle in creating interest and attention for those people within the government, within the last donors also, because they are not bringing in numbers for you. So I think there is more effort required, and needs the if impact has to be calculated not just in numbers but in the quantum shift you are bringing in the lives of those people. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Samina. I think that's a very, very mindful note to end on. How do we ensure we are being inclusive as we look at large-scale system transformation? Thank you again, Atul, Samina, Nikita, Raj. I could continue this conversation forever, but do join us into the main session as we continue this conversation. Really appreciate all your comments here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
Thank you,
Vishal.
Vishal.
Thank you.